And recording is in progress. That's a new thing. I haven't seen that before.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that is their new security. Everyone has to say, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. I love it. So usually, I don't know how long your presentation is, Gwen, but just for the audience, we usually do about, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes or however long the content takes, and then we'll jump into questions. And then also, I will remind everybody that, we'd love for you to get more information and ask Gwen questions about the Profit First. But at the end of the session, if you feel like you're really here for the office hours for some other pressing business matter, me and my team, and I'm sure Gwen will be happy to help you with giving you feedback on any of those. So without further ado, thanks so much, Gwen Bortner, for joining us today, and take it away.
Thanks, Leanne. I really appreciate being invited to come and talk with you all about this. Profit First is something I discovered really early after Mike published his book, and then became kind of a fangirl of Mike and have since read most, if not all, of his other books. His tagline is he's trying to eradicate entrepreneurial poverty, which I really love. So many of us go into business and we just kind of barely get by, or don't even really get by. And Profit First to me is one of the linchpins in that process. So as COVID hit, I decided to actually become a Profit First certified professional, and started through the process and have since become certified in Profit First. Even though I had read the book, I had implemented it for myself, and recommended several of my clients look at Profit First. But whenever we did that, I always recommended that they find a Profit First certified professional. And so Profit First for me was life-changing, because it really made me start looking at the finances in my business completely differently. And for many people, it'd be like, oh yeah, no, it's a huge thing. But I actually was very much into my finances. I love math. I love numbers. I'm one of those weirdos that actually likes doing my bookkeeping every 2 weeks. Like, oh yeah, that's fun. So the finance part didn't scare me, but I wasn't always doing what I needed to be doing. And the thing that's beautiful about Profit First is it's really a simplified system for managing your business based on your cash flow. The phrase that they often use to describe it is it's a cash flow system. Now, the thing that's interesting is a lot of accountants, the CPAs are like, yeah, I don't get it. I don't think it makes sense. But it's because accountants think about your numbers differently than most of us think about our numbers. And this system is really designed to work with the way that we naturally approach our finances and our numbers. Now, truth be told, I actually approach my finances and numbers much more like an accountant, because that's the way my brain works. But still found huge value in Profit First. And so the concept around Profit First is some of you may have experienced either by your parents or your grandparents the envelope system for managing their money, their personal income. I know I was raised that way. There was this spot in the house that there was a big envelope that had a bunch of smaller envelopes. And if mom was sending me to the grocery store on my bicycle, remember when we would do those kind of things way back when, we would have those kind of errands to run, she would say, go into the food envelope, because there was an envelope that said food on it, and pull out $20. And when I came back, I had to put all the change back, because that was the food allocation for the month. And instead of writing checks, even though they were very much about writing checks on a lot of things, it was actually pulled out as cash. And so if the envelope was empty, that was it. There was no more money to spend. And so you got very creative, because if it was the middle of the month and the food envelope was getting low, is like, okay, we need to not be buying expensive food, we need to be buying cheap food, because we've got to make that food money last for the rest of the month. And so this envelope system is really the concept that Mike has developed into Profit First. Where I find with my craft-based clients, and most of my clients that I work with in the craft industry are actually in the retail or manufacturing part of the industry, where I find that most people have the biggest problem is they spend too much money on inventory. And you're like, but we got to have inventory to be able to sell things. Well, yes, and when I talk with retail clients early in any conversation, one of the first things they'll say is, I'm having this problem and I'm not sure what to do. And I always say, well, your first problem is you need to reduce your inventory. And they're like, but it's not an inventory problem. Yeah, no, it's always an inventory problem. Almost every client that I've ever worked with has way, way, way too much inventory for what their business sales support. And so and Profit First helps us look at that and say, how much do we really have to be spending on inventory? And so when we look at Profit First, the concept where Mike actually came up with the concept is there's a whole long story, but suffice it to say, he was not in a good place in his life, and he was up in the middle of the night watching late night infomercials and saw a weight loss infomercial. And they talked about smaller plates. And if you've ever done much research into weight loss, I know I have, a lot of females do. They talk about that if you have a smaller plate and fill it with food, that you tend to not eat as much, as opposed to giant plates. I don't know if you've been to the Cheesecake Factory, but they have these giant plates, which would probably feed a family of 4 with just one meal in, kind of in what I'll call the olden days. But if you have a smaller plate, you actually feel full because the plate is full. It doesn't look empty in the whole process. Well, the idea is kind of the same with Profit First, is instead of saying, oh my gosh, I've got all of this money in one giant account, which we typically call our checking account, we actually break it up into smaller plates, much like the envelope system, where we don't have all of the money that came home into the family to spend on food. We only have a small piece of it to spend on food. So the idea is to take our big pot of money, all the money that comes in through, sales and wherever our income comes in, and break it into smaller pots of money so that we don't say, oh gosh, we've got this big, huge amount of money. We say, no, we only have a portion of it to go into any particular area of the business. Now, some people freak out because the Profit First book actually has you open up multiple bank accounts as part of the process, but it makes a huge difference. And the reason we have you open up multiple bank accounts is back to Profit First is about the way that we actually think and work with our money. Most people, if they want to know how much money they have to spend, they get onto their app and they look at what the bank balance is. And we say, oh, we've got X amount in the bank, so I've got X amount to spend. It's hard for us to process ahead of time and say, oh, but I need to put this much in for payroll, and I've got these 3 subscriptions coming, and I've got this other thing. And we don't think about all of those other pieces of the business that we need to take care of. And so when I work with craft businesses, one of the first things I have them set up is an inventory account. And the rule is, if you're buying something that's going to be resold, it has to be bought out of that inventory account. And if you have no money in there, you get to buy nothing. If you have $100 in there, you can spend $100, but you can't spend $200. Oh, but at $200, I get free shipping. Yeah, no, too bad, so sad. You either have to wait until $200 gets in there, or you buy now and you pay for your shipping. And so the process that we do in Profit First is all of the sales come into one account. We call it the income account. Once each processing bookkeeping cycle, which we generally recommend is no more than twice a month for most businesses. It can be once a week. We're a little flexible on it. You allocate all of the money out of income into the various accounts. The typical accounts that we have are profit, because you should get paid for taking the risk of starting a business. And that has nothing to do with you doing the work. This is just for being a business owner. The next account is owner's comp. This is for the work that you do in the business. This is making sure you get paid for the time that you're putting into your business. How many craft business people do I know have said, oh yeah, no, the business is doing great, it's doing fine. And I say, how much are you taking out? Oh, well, I don't get paid. Then it's not surviving, because you're doing work and you have to be able to pay someone to do that work if it's not you. So you need to be able to pay for the work that you're doing. We also set up a tax account. This account is for paying for the taxes for your employment taxes. Many of us work in a sole proprietorship type of situation, so we have to pay the employee side of the taxes and the employer side of the taxes, as well as the business taxes, any taxes that the business has to pay for actually making money. Then we have an operations account. And the operations account typically is paying for all of the remaining expenses. However, one of the accounts that I always set up is an inventory account. And that inventory account is this separate account that we say, this account is what we're actually going to be using to pay for replacement of inventory. And we base how much we put into each of these accounts based on percentages. And that's the joy of working with a profit first professional. A profit first professional will give you a starting percentage. And what we do is we actually go through an analysis of finding out what we should be doing to start. And what we do is we start with, where are you currently? How much are you putting into profit? Often it's zero. How much are you doing for owner's comp? Sometimes that's zero too, never makes me as happy, but sometimes that's zero. How much are you doing for taxes? That would include like making your estimated taxes, things of that nature, whatever that percentage is. How much is going into buying inventory? We get a percentage there. How much is going into the rest of your operational expenses? So we start there and figure out what those percentages are. And then we go ahead and start incrementally upping the percentages to get to what they call their target allocation percentages. Megan asked, what should the percentage of the total income be in the first two accounts? Well, it's based on the size of the business. There's a chart in Profit First where Mike did a ton of research with a lot of businesses that were successful, profitable, ongoing concern businesses of all sorts of sizes, from 0 to 100,000 on up to multi-million, 8-figure type businesses, and said, what are the percentages that we are typically seeing in there? When we're talking about a really small business, typically we see the profit percentage being at 5% is the target allocation percentage. Owner's comp is usually running in the 40% to 50% kind of area. Tax almost always hits 15%. Now, this is what they call the percentages of what he calls real income. And real income is your sales less your cost of goods. And so I always tweak these percentages fairly significantly, because cost of goods for a retail business is a big piece of the total income. Typically in our industry, we find that it's 50% ish of our real income. So we actually need to take our total sales, and I'm going to use some really round numbers just so that we can kind of talk about some real numbers. If your sales were $100,000, typically your cost of goods is going to be around $50,000. So that only leaves $50,000 for the rest of your expenses. Okay. And so in using the target allocation percentages, what the Profit First process would say is take the $100,000, subtract the $50,000, and then those percentages that I just gave you, the 5%, the 50%, the 15%, the remainder is only against that remaining $50,000 after you've taken out your cost of goods. When I do a Profit First allocation for my retail clients, I actually just do it right off the top retail number. And so all those percentages get changed based on taking out that inventory account number. Most of my clients, what I find is that their inventory is, like I said, way too high. So we don't actually allocate 50% to go back to replace inventory because they actually need to be reducing their inventory. So if they sell a $100 item, they don't really need to be buying $50 items more. We need to actually be reducing it. And so often it's down to like 40%. And so we actually are working at slowly reducing their inventory over time. But all of these numbers, we start out at wherever you're at, and we make 1% adjustments, because when we talk about 1%, that's not very much. And so if it used to take you $50,000 to run your business, can you do it on 1% less? 1%, what's 1% of 50,000? That's $500. Can you do it on $500 or less? Yeah, probably. And hey, let's put that in profit. So we actually start doing something for you with it. Now, as we go through that process, what happens is that account that we have for expenses gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And people are like, I can't do that. I can't do. Yes, you can. Because you get creative. You start looking and saying, do I really need to spend all of that money on all of these things that I'm spending money on? I was having this conversation with one of my clients, and all of my clients have been virtual long before COVID hit. And so we were on a Zoom call like this, and she's like, I've looked at my expenses. There's nothing I can cut. There's absolutely nothing I can cut. And I was like, okay, I know it feels that way, but I'm sure that's not true. About that time, the water cooler guy walked past her in her office and put a big, 5-gallon or 10-gallon, whatever those big containers are of water, onto the water cooler, and then, walked back out. And I said, so is your water actually bad? Like, is it not drinkable? And she said, oh no, it's fine. I said, how much do you pay for the water cooler every month? And she went, oh. Because sure, it's not big. It's not like it's $1,000 a month expense. It's 20, it's 30, it's 50. I have no idea what it was, but it's a relatively small number. But you take $25 and you multiply it times 12 months, and poof, that's $300. And sure, you're saying, well, $300 isn't that much. I don't know about you. I like having $300 in my pocket. That will make me way happier. And so we start looking at, how do we reduce the expenses that we don't need? How many of you have a subscription for some software, some app, something that you used to use, but you aren't using now, but it's a subscription. It just hits your credit card, hits at regular time. It's just what's happening. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's only $5. Yeah, but $5 over 12 months is $60. Wouldn't you rather have $60 in your pocket? I would. I'd always rather have it in my pocket. And so we use that process to start allocating and making us think about having smaller plates, so that we don't want to do let these things just linger. And we get really creative on where we're going to spend our money. When it comes to inventory, my clients who are using it have realized what they start asking themselves is, how bad do I really want this thing? How likely do I believe that this product, whatever this inventory product is going to sell quickly and become more revenue for me? Instead of like, oh, that's kind of fun, I think I'll try it out. Maybe, but maybe not. We also find that my clients who used to say, oh yeah, I'll buy one of every color, now get much more serious about, I'm going to buy 8 colors or 10 colors instead of the 20 colors, because they know that 5, 10, 15 of these colors, their clients aren't going to buy. So they actually start getting much more serious about making the decisions each time. One of my clients does a ton of trade shows. That's part of her business. And so we've also put a separate account for trade shows, because we wanted to make her start thinking about, do you want to do every advertising opportunity? Do you want to do all the sponsorships? Which trade shows do you want to go? Do you go just because you've gone all the years before? Is it really making you money? And so you can set up as many or as few of accounts as you want. Most of my clients have 5 to 8 accounts. I have the most minimal kind of need for my business because I just do consulting, and I still have 5 accounts that I work with. And it's exciting to watch and see what's happening in them. So the question was, how often are you changing by 1% every month, every 3 months? We actually recommend that you do an evaluation once a quarter, so every 3 months. And we evaluate, because sometimes as you evaluate, you see, oh, we can actually do a 2% adjustment, or this is really becoming problematic, that we need to do something else. What I have found often as people get into it is they realize we can actually take more money out than we thought that we were taking out. So we can actually set up a separate account that is for future expansion or future growth or hiring that new person or whatever that special thing is. And so you actually start putting money away that is, you become your own bank. So instead of having to get a loan to do an expansion, you've got the money just sitting there. When you're ready, you just whoop, bring it in, and away you go. If you're thinking or wanting to bring on a person, you can set up an account that is the next new person, and you allocate the money that you would need to be paying them. And if you're able to do that and still make your business run, then poof, bringing them on, no risk, no worry. And oh, by the way, you usually have 2 or 3 months of their salary already sitting in there as additional backup as part of it as well. So some people like, oh, it's got to be a reconciliation nightmare. Look at all those accounts you have to reconcile. Well, the reality is most of the accounts only have 1 or 2 transactions each time that you're processing your books. So it's some money in and some money out, some money in, some money out. So it's not overly difficult, and it does allow you to stay focused on certain ones. So in the case of an inventory account, you know that all of your inventory vendor account stuff is just in one place, and you aren't having to cross-reference in 2 or 3 or 4 different places. For myself, I find the reconciliation probably takes almost the exact same amount of time. Most of my clients, once they get into it, also find the same thing, that the reconciliation really is not that big of a deal because the additional accounts are only a few. The trick is working with the banks, but most banks these days will allow you to aggregate your total balances of all your accounts to determine whether or not you get bank fees on it. But you have to, you may have to make adjustments with your bank. There's some banks that are just like, nope, we're going to charge you $15 for every account you have. Trust me, there's banks out there that want your business, and they are more than happy to make make the adjustments for doing that. And what turns out to happen is you end up having larger sums staying in the bank. For example, my tax account, I keep putting the amount that I need for my taxes in there all the time, and it gets really large by the end of the year because I need to be able to pay my taxes. But it's sitting in there waiting for it to happen. And when that tax bill comes, I have never had to panic about paying the tax bill, because even on the years where my business grew substantially, and although my estimates came nowhere near paying what my taxes were due, I had that money sitting there waiting for me. And when my accountant says, hey, this is what your taxes are going to be, be prepared, it's like, yeah, it's no problem. I've got that money. I'm just waiting for it. And quite honestly, the beauty for myself has been often when she says that, she says, but if you want to put some, X amount into your IRA, it'll reduce it by this amount. Usually I've got that much money sitting in that tax account as well. So I'm actually able to pay myself instead of paying the government with my money that I've set aside. And it makes that whole process. So finances just become like a non-issue because I'm not spending money I don't have. And that really is the power of Profit First. For my clients that were using it as they went into COVID and the whole business model changed and how much they had to spend and whether it went up or it went down, there was no stress for them because they knew how much money they had to spend. And so they weren't just buying inventory that they couldn't afford. They were buying the inventory that they could afford. And they were able to make adjustments to their spending plans based on knowing how much money was actually coming in. Instead of having to react to what happened afterwards, they were able to be proactive in their process. Now, honestly, going through Profit First is if you really want to dig into it, I really recommend the book, which Leanne has put that in the chat. It's a really great resource. If you're like me and you like to listen to books, Mike is a really, really enjoyable listen. He reads his own books, and he always adds lots of little extra details and things that aren't in the written book. I have both because I like to refer back to the book when I need some quick information, but the Audible book is a great listen if you like to listen to it. And if you want to go through the process, I have shared with Laura a worksheet that'll help you figure out how much money you're spending where now in these broad categories. And so she'll be sharing that in whatever manner they typically share that, but you have access to that, and you can actually work through the worksheet and say, how much am I spending? You know, how much am I taking as owner's comp? How much am I taking as profit? How much is going into tax? How much is going into operational expense? They don't have the other categories that I talked about because this is designed for kind of the generic business, but you can also look at your cost of goods. They do have the cost of goods and say, how much is actually coming out in my cost of goods on any given month? And you may be surprised how much you're actually spending on inventory. It may be way more than you think that it was going to.
Yeah. Before you answer that quick question, the next one coming up, I just want to also mention, I'll put in the chat a really, I think, helpful recording that I had the privilege of doing with Mike on our podcast, which is Business of Craft. It's episode 61, and Mike and I chatted a lot about Profit First and Clockwork, so I'll go ahead and put that link in there also. And I think Megan had another question for you, Gwen, in the chat.
Any recommendations on a bank? Different banks in different areas are good to, are better to work with than not. If you want to drop me an email at gwen@gwenbortner.com and tell me your area, we have resources of like, these are the banks in this particular area that tend to be more profit first friendly is what we call them. And how much money do you need to be bringing in? You don't really need to have that much money you're bringing in. It will depend on the bank. Some banks have minimum balance requirements. And so you want to be looking at, is your total number coming close to that minimum balance requirement? But at the same point, if you start the process even before, you may have to pay some fees at the beginning, but this process really helps you keep more of your money. And so if you're like really, pretty close on the edge, because often it's $100 kind of minimum, aggregate minimum, or maybe $1,000 aggregate minimum. It doesn't take very long for you to have that aggregate sitting in your accounts. I will tell you the best places to generally look are at credit unions. If you've got any access to a credit union in your vicinity, often they are really the best to work with. They're usually really, really good. So, and also local banks tend to be better than the big banks. So you can do it with Bank of America, but they're not nearly as friendly, to work with. So if you've got local banks, they tend to be better to work with from that kind of standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks, Gwen. That was an amazing introduction to Profit First. And I hope that the listeners on the call and watching the video afterwards will get the book and learn more about it. I've got two questions for you. They're related. The general theme is, how do you make that decision about what expenses to cut? And of course, as a marketing person, I'm thinking I'm wearing my marketing glasses, and sometimes I get the stabbing pain in my heart when a client says, I've got to cut expenses, so we're canceling everything. We're cutting out all the social media, all the advertising, all the promotions, everything. And, to me, I don't always think that's the best approach. For sure, like everything else, there's probably areas you can cut back and trim. But I think, if you're spending $1 on marketing and you're making $5, that's not an expense that you want to cut. But in other cases, you can certainly trim the fat. So what do you advise clients when it comes to marketing, and how do they look at that? Of course, it's in the expense column, but how do you make a decision about what you're going to keep and what you're going to cut when it comes to marketing?
Well, so when you're looking at all of the expenses, because it's really true for all of them, is that the first thing you want to look at is, are you actually using the thing that you're paying for? And is it creating value? Okay, so those are the two things. And to me, that's across the board. Doesn't matter whether, it's the water service example or whether it's your marketing. There are some marketing services that you may be paying for, but aren't actually creating any money. And if they aren't, then they may not be where you want, that may be an area that you want to trim. But there's going to be other things that the investment is actually creating income for it. And so that's the thing you want to look at, is really, where are the things that you're using or not. If you're not using it, really, that's an easy one to trim, right off the bat. For example, I know that none of my people that I'm really trying to work with are on Facebook. So if I had to pay for Facebook, which I know I don't, but let's pretend like for the moment that I did, that would be a ridiculous expense, even though technically everyone says, oh my gosh, you got to be on Facebook. It's like, no, because I'm not actually getting any clients from Facebook. So that would be an expense that I would cut. However, if I had to pay for being on LinkedIn, which is a place that I do find my clients, it would be a marketing expense that I wouldn't cut, because I know that that's someplace where I'm really getting that value. And so if you're looking, using the example of one of my clients with the trade shows, she puts lots of money out in marketing. And so I'm making her say, I want to make sure you're actually getting value for that dollar. So would you have gotten the same amount of sales by putting this ad in the show book or not?
Right.
And in some cases, the answer is no, I wouldn't have gotten near as much without having been in the show book. Okay, great. Then it's worth it to do it. But if you're just doing it because you've always done it, then maybe not, right? Are people actually picking up the show book? Are they looking at the show book? Are they keeping the show book? Are they, doing those things where you're actually seeing that there is an ongoing piece? And so,
I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think one of the places that clients really fall short is, they throw a lot of mud up on the wall when it comes to marketing, and they don't have that tracking mechanism, or they have no capability of knowing, oh, I'm going to put an ad in the show book and then what? Or they have a great show and they don't know, was it the show book? Was it the new product showcase? Was it the speaking that you did? Was it the business cards you handed out? Was it this, that, the other? So
exactly.
trying to have some mechanisms in place where you're tracking, and that's true across all your social media, print ads, radio ads. I mean, really any sort of marketing, you really want to make sure that you're trying to track those opportunities, because that's a way of saving money also, is by trimming down to get to the point where you're only spending money on marketing on the things that you're actually getting ROI. And if you're spending money on all the things and not tracking any of the things, you're almost like obligated to keep doing the things, all of them, because if you cut the thing that's wrong, the thing that was making you money, well, then you're in a bad place. So it really helps. I think you've got to have tracking, and you've got to have data to know what things are working, so that you can do what Gwen recommended. You can cut back on the extraneous fat that you don't need to be able to succeed in your business.
Well, and so often when we're doing, one of the things we also recommend quarterly is that you look at all your expenses quarterly, because things will change in a quarter. So something that was an absolute, yes, I need to be spending money on, the next quarter, you can say, you know what, I'm not sure that's what I need to be spending money on now. And for something that you don't have the answer, that becomes the project for that quarter. You don't just cut it. You say, okay, so how are we going to track and figure out if this thing is making us money or not making us money, so that
Right.
we can actually make a better decision next time. So we try to be fairly cautious unless we're in a desperate situation, because
Yeah.
sometimes we are in a desperate situation, but most of the time we try to be pretty cautious and say, cut the things that are obvious, and the things that are iffy because you really don't know, then focus on how do you make them not iffy. How do you get the data that you absolutely need so that you can make a good choice? And
Right.
you may find out that, you know, the money that you're spending on all of your marketing is exactly right and totally target focused. And so then we, you know, we look for the water bottles.
Yeah.
You
Right.
know?
Filtered water.
Yeah.
So I have another sort of related part in terms of decision making. I think that labor costs is one of the most expensive line items that you'll see on an accounting spreadsheet. And I think a lot of clients struggle, especially in the craft industry. Do I bring on that employee or the second employee, or do I cut back the employee? And if I cut back the employee, then that means I have to do it. And I like to have conversations with clients about, well, what is your time worth? Is it better for you to pay someone X amount of dollars per hour so that it frees up your time to grow the business or to do the things only you can do? So can you speak to that a little bit? How do you advise clients in making decisions about labor costs in general?
Yeah, and so it actually falls back into the exact same answer of what is the value and what are you getting in exchange, and what are you doing with that? And it is exactly what you were saying, Leanne, is that there are things that you can do that you can do, but your time would be better spent doing something else. But at the same token, there's this crossover point, because early on in the business, it's like, okay, if someone else was doing this, what would I be doing with my time? And would it be creating income that would not only pay for my employee, but also pay for, the rest of my time at the same time? And early on, often the answer is no. I mean, let's really be honest. Most of the time, it's no. You're not fully booked. You're not running out of hours in the day. But as you start running out of hours in the day, it's like, what can we be getting, what can we be delegating, and what can we be getting rid of? And then working through that balance and being aware that you have to also continue to ask that question quarterly, is, do I have the right people doing the right things for the right fees so that I'm able to do the right things and use my time really well? Recently, I rehired one of my first virtual assistants who does writing. And she's basically a ghostwriter at this point in time. And that was where she had kind of migrated to. And I reached back out to her and I said, I think I'm ready to have you start ghostwriting for me. Again, it's been years since I've had her do it. And because writing for me is a struggle. I can do it, but I
Right.
don't enjoy it. It takes lots of time. It's not really where I'm at. And so I reached out to her and we talked, and I said, okay, so what I want to be able to do is have, a couple quick conversations with you, tell you, just brain dump my ideas, because this is how we used to work. And I said, and then I want you to write, these kinds of things for me that then we'll repurpose in all of the ways. And I was talking to my husband about it, and because he actually had come up with the idea, says, why don't you reach back out to her? And I realized it made perfect sense, because after the first thing that came back, I looked at it. She said, yeah, it took me about an hour and a half or 2 hours for this. It would have taken me 5 hours
Right.
to do that. And these days I am booked enough that I'm making way more money during those 5 hours
Right.
than, I'm not sitting around saying, yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do today. I mean, my
Right.
calendar is really, really booked. And so it totally makes sense. Not only does it reduce my stress, but it also is a really good exchange of dollar for value.
Yeah.
But 2 years ago, that wasn't the case. And so it didn't make sense for me to continue to have her do it. She was doing that for me several years ago, and I stopped because I'd gotten to the point that that value was not worth the exchange. I still loved her doing it. It was way easier on me, but I was getting free time that wasn't actually making money.
Right.
And so it was like, okay, so if it's not actually making money, then I can't be paying for it. And so looking at that and figuring out where that is and realizing that sometimes it'll go one way and then it may go back the other, and you may have to make some adjustments over time. But also looking in the retail world, one of the things that I often have folks look at is like, what hours do you really need to be open?
Right.
Because if you're open, you've got to have staff. And a lot of people have been open their hours because that's the hours that they're open, but it's like, but no one ever comes in to speak of for the first hour and a half of the day. What if you opened an hour and a half later? Well, that saves an hour and a half worth of wages, for whatever is required within your store. What if you were closed the day that most people, that you're only doing $100 in sales in, and you've got $200 in labor cost?
Right.
That day is costing you money. And so making some choices on both of those pieces of looking at when does it make sense and when are you actually freeing up your time, and for things that really will make money, and the other side of when are you spending money because it seems like it's the right thing to do, but it's not actually providing value.
That is the tricky part. And I promise to our listeners that Gwen and I are not on any sort of affiliate program with Mike Michalowicz, but I will also say he wrote another awesome book called Clockwork. And that book is really more about systems and processes and how to get your business on sort of a more automated schedule. But the reason I recommend that book also when we're talking about labor and cost savings is because he's got some great worksheets in there that help you go through your whole day and write down all the things you're doing in a day and then put them into different categories. And you can determine like, what are the things only I can do? Or what are the things I can put into a system or a process? Or what are the things that it's worth outsourcing at $15 an hour? So if you're listening and you feel like this is an important topic for you, but you don't really know how to wrap your arms around it, I would highly recommend Clockwork, his other book, because that might give you a couple of snippets and ideas on how to think about making the decision that Gwen was just talking about.
And related to that is also deciding what do you not actually need to do.
Yeah, right.
Because often there's stuff that we think we need to do that we don't actually need to do.
Yeah.
And so that's another piece of that equation.
Right.
But once you get down to what is the things that only I can do, it's a little surprising because often that list is way smaller than you think it is.
Yeah. That was an enlightening part for me. And what you just mentioned was the things that you're doing just because you feel like you're supposed to show up at work from 9 to 5, and if you're there you better figure out something to do. And so how many of us just create sort of busy work when we really don't need to be doing that? There's other things we should be doing. So that was enlightening. All right, well, if there's other questions, we'd love to take those now. Megan, you've been great using the chat to throw Gwen your questions, but if somebody would like to unmute themselves and or come on to video, we're a pretty small group today, so you can go ahead and do that. So we'll give everybody a minute to do that. Thank you. In the meantime, I'll say thank you so much, Gwen. Super helpful as an introduction to the concept and the book. Laura just put another link for everybody in the chat. You can find most of Mike's work at mikemichalowicz.com. And, in addition to the 2 books that Gwen and I mentioned, he's got several others just on different topics within the realm of business. And of course, I think his website's fantastic with tons of resources. So again, I swear we're not getting paid by Mike. We're just super fans. And I hope
one of his other books that I find a lot of people in the craft industry have found value in is the Pumpkin Plan, which is about really getting focused on who is your client. Because so often when I've talked with folks in the craft world, doesn't matter which department of the craft world you put them in, you say, who do you service? And they say all fill in the blank. Right.
Yeah,
it's I service knitters, I service quilters, I service beaters, I service, whoever it happens to be. And it's like, yeah, that's wrong.
Yeah.
because when you're trying to service everybody, you end up kind of serving nobody.
Yeah.
And the Pumpkin Plan is a great book to help get clear on that
Absolutely.
and work through that process.
So Gwen, share with us a little more if someone out there is interested in working with you or taking the next steps to find a Profit First consultant. Hopefully that's you. I know what would that next step be?
So you can always reach out to me on my website at gwenbortner.com. And Leanne, you put my email in there earlier, which is great. Thank you. Gwen at gwenbortner.com. Super, super easy. Always happy to set up a chat to figure out, what do you really need? And am I the right person to help you with that? If you're looking for a Profit First professional, they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. They all focus on different types of things. You can always go to the Profit First Professionals website and actually look up to find a certified Profit First professional. Many Profit First professionals are coming from a tax and accounting background, just because it makes sense. There's a few of us out there that actually start in the coaching world, and really that's where our focus is. But most everybody comes from the other. And depending on what all you're looking for, sometimes that becomes really helpful. If you're looking for someone who has some real specific state-based knowledge, if you're looking for some tax and some other things, then it makes sense, because that you can also find them by state and say, I want to find someone who's actually really familiar with my tax situation in, I don't know, Illinois, or wherever it happens to be. And lots of resources out there. I will tell you that if you're in the retail world, there's only a few of us that really get retail and understand the challenges that come with retail. So if you're interested in that, and you're looking for someone who's a tax person who's familiar with the craft world and retail, I'm happy to make an introduction. His name is Jacob. He is a co-owner in a quilt shop with his mother, and but is also a CPA. And so he comes with that kind of full package, which is really hard to find, I have found, in the industry. So if you're looking for that, reach out to me, and I'm happy to make an introduction to Jacob, because I think he's a really good mix of understanding the industry and the nuances of the craft world, and coming with the right credentialing for doing accounting, accounting kind of questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Gwen, so much for sharing your valuable time with us. I don't see any other questions in the chat or anyone jumping on. Oh, Megan, I see your finger. Go ahead.
Asking all the questions, so I want to give everybody else a chance first. I was curious because I'm a knitwear designer. I sell patterns, and I know sales during Christmas time is for retailers are great. I was wondering if you guys know anything about pattern sales during Christmas time. Are people too busy with all the holidays to really be buying patterns at that time? Is it still a good time to put out, something new and big, or maybe focus on small gift knit kind of patterns? Or do you guys have any recommendations?
Leanne, do you want me to answer, given my past role? Because I worked for the years in the industry as a knitwear designer. So
you did. You are the perfect person to answer that.
My experience is that pattern releases in around the holiday season are only good if they're small, quick patterns, because most people have already made their commitments for their bigger gifts that they're going to do, and most people aren't really very fast in their knitwear creation. And so what I found is, when you focus on really gifty kind of items that are relatively quick, and still putting them out far enough ahead. If you get too much into holiday season, back to people have already decided what they're going to be making people, they've gone through that. So I find that for the designer, the holiday season is really in the middle, late fall.
Okay.
If you're launching stuff too much, to the Thanksgiving time or thereafter, most people have already made their mental commitments of what they're knitting, who they're knitting for. You know, they've started making their yarn purchases. They've kind of done those things. Where I have found, just even though this wasn't your question, what I have found is launching bigger projects in the early after Christmas timeframe, like the January, February timeframe, can be really good, because that's when it's like, I have done my stuff for everybody else. I'm doing something for me. And there's also that anticipation of, I've got the whole year ahead and I can, you know, and so for bigger things, typically I find that tends to be a better time frame to do, you know, marketing and launches and that kind of stuff. And then of course, early, you know, late summer, early fall, people get into knitting mode. So that's another, you know, that's been my experience, is that's another really good time, early, you know, early August through, you know, mid-late September. So those are my experiences. Leanne, what have you found based on all your marketing experience?
Exactly the same as what you said, just verbatim. I couldn't have said it better as far as the seasonality, the type of project, the time people are buying, the time people are looking. It's all, she's accurate with all of that. So thanks for that, Gwen.
But also, you know, people are buying all the time. You know, I have not put any new designs out in a long time because that's not where my focus is, but I still get a pretty consistent set of sales, which isn't big because I'm not doing any marketing around it at all, but I pretty much can expect the same number of pattern sales every month on an ongoing basis, because I'm not doing any sort of new launch. So people are always looking.
Megan, does that help?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, great. The baby's adorable, by the way.
I tried to get him down for nap before. It did not work.
No, he knows we're talking about interesting things. He wants to be here.
And just to give a little Profit First twist on that question, one of the things that Profit First is really great about is being able to help flatten out those cycles in your income. And that's one of the other things that I talk about when I'm working with someone in Profit First, is how do we allocate and use the money so that we actually get a much more steady income, and we see steady streams coming, you know, to cover expenses. Because generally, although our sales may be doing this, our expenses are usually much more, you know, consistent across the line. And so because Profit First is a cash flow system, it's another place that it can really help with that.
Mm-hmm. All right, are there any other questions from our live audience? All right. Well, thank you again, Gwen. I really appreciate your time today.
Always a pleasure to be chatting with you and your folks. Really appreciate it.
Well, I think everybody got a lot out of it today, and they can all watch the rebroadcast. We'll be uploading that to our YouTube channel. And yeah, thank you again, Gwen. And thanks for everybody for joining our office hours. Real quick, I'll let Laura share some information about our upcoming topics for office hours. We hope that you'll join us next time. Laura, do you want to share with us what that will be?
I just put a link in the thread to our YouTube channel. We post all of our office hours sessions there, so you can always go back and check into them afterwards if you have to miss any. Next time we will be meeting on July 20th, and we will be discussing the our best tips and tricks and pitfalls to avoid in running a make-along. So we have just finished doing a couple make-alongs with clients, and we help them with them often. So we have lots of lessons learned to share with you.
All right, we'll look forward to it. And if you're not already on our newsletter list, that would be the best place to sign up, and you'll receive notifications of when the office hours are coming up, so you don't have to remember on your own, because I know you're all busy entrepreneurs doing a lot of things. So let us take that one thing off your plate for you and send you that reminder. So, all right, everybody, thanks again for coming to our office hours, and we'll see you next time.